In France, two armed men pretends to be shopping in a supermarket, but turns out to be criminals who came to rob the place. One of the men, Drago, goes into the manager's office, takes out his gun, and orders him to take out the CCTV tape, before instructing him to empty his drawer into his leather bag. Meanwhile, in the mall, Bruno also takes out his gun and orders everyone to remain calm, as there is an ongoing robbery, assuring everyone that if they cooperate, no one will get hurt. While Annie, Bruno's girlfriend, who's the getaway driver, sits in the car and waits for the men quietly. After making sure the cashiers have emptied their drawers into the bag, Bruno picks it up, bids everyone farewell, and they drive away to celebrate a successful heist. Inside the car, Bruno keeps distracting Annie with his touches and kisses, to the point that they almost crash, and Drago had to beg them to stop doing the naughty while police vehicles pass them. At the station, the chief of police George interrogates a criminal who's been arrested more than 17 times when news about the robbery is brought to his table. He learns the identity of the robbers immediately from the report presented to him, noting that Bruno has once been arrested when he was 18 and detained for 4 months. The other officer reports that the trio made away with $200,000, and with this, he quickly dismisses the other criminal in front of him, saying he has a bigger fish to catch. The two ladies who helped identify the criminals can't help but keep admiring how handsome Bruno actually is and end up giving George a vague response when he questions them. Somewhere around the city, Bruno keeps taunting Annie that he'd jump into the ocean. This scares Annie so much that she says she would stop loving him if he doesn't listen to her. Bruno doesn't care anyway and jumps. After several minutes, Bruno hasn't surfaced yet, and Annie starts to panic, thinking her lover has met a gruesome fate, and jumps in too to try to look for him. Thinking about the worst, suddenly Bruno surfaces, and they hug each other, with Annie making Bruno promise not to try it again. The couple takes pictures and spends some lovely moments together before doing the naughty. The next day, while having a good time with Drago, his girlfriend Marika soon shows up and they all had fun together. A friendly argument ensues, and Bruno confesses that he doesn't believe in politics because it only exonerates the rich and keeps the poor people poor. He believes in freedom, and the government can never offer that. Annie is furious at his mindset and tells him he never actually believed in anything, and she sometimes doubts the love he has for her. In the following scene, the couple starts dividing the acquired money among themselves. Bruno gives Annie her own share, but she refuses, saying whatever is his own share would be her cut, as they're a couple. Bruno shares that he sometimes buys groceries and gives to the needy, but his girlfriend reprimands him, saying that no matter how much good he's doing with the money, a lot of people want to see him go to jail. Bruno doesn't believe he's done anything wrong since he's stealing from the rich, and no matter the crime of the rich, they never really get arrested. In the following month, the trio bursts into so many stores that they could barely keep count. As they spend some free time together, Patrick, one of Bruno's cousins, shows up and they have dinner together. In the evening, Patrick says he wants to join them in the next robbery, and Bruno tells him his role, saying he shouldn't drink or do something stupid so everything goes according to plan. As everyone leaves, Patrick stays behind and pretends he's going through the plan, but instead, he injects himself with a substance that makes him pass out. In the next raid, everything goes smoothly until the store manager refuses to comply, so Drago has to use more force to make him cooperate. At that moment, Bruno leaves Patrick in charge, telling him to watch the civilians while he checks up on Drago. He gets there and tells him to hurry. However, Patrick keeps yelling at the cashier, who keeps saying she's having a heart attack and can't breathe. Patrick insists that the old lady tie herself up. Seeing this, Bruno quickly tells his cousin to be calm. At that moment, his gun goes off, causing the civilians to panic. Inside the car, Drago scolds Patrick for being so careless and he keeps yelling back, making Bruno intervene and tell him to shut up or he'll kill him with his hands. The police soon arrive, and thankfully, no one was hurt. The store manager keeps bragging about how he managed to scare the thieves, while George thinks he's an embarrassment to society. One of his colleagues tells him about his upcoming promotion, saying they have to celebrate it so he can take his mind off the current situation. At night, while they rest, Bruno suddenly wakes up and senses something is off. He tells everyone to wake up, get their things, and hurry to the car because they need to leave the building immediately. On their way, they see 3 police vehicles making their way to their home, and everyone is amazed at how such instincts have saved their lives. The gang soon reaches Paris, where they spend the night partying. In France, Marika shares her experience with a former criminal who got a life sentence, saying she doesn't want the same fate for Drago. Patrick, on the other hand, keeps taking happy powder and starts causing trouble with one of the notorious criminals. Bruno doesn't want things to escalate, so he begs Drago to sort out the situation since he's acquainted with the guy Patrick just provoked. After seeing Bruno, the guy soon calms down, and later they get to know each other. In the following days, the gang travels down to Chelsea downtown, where Bruno pretends to be a gentleman who comes to buy jewelry, only to reveal his intentions when his new partner, Steve, bursts in. They successfully pack all the jewelry on display. At the station, two men are arguing over a dispute, and they get so loud that George has to come sort them out. There, one of them promises to give him some information concerning Bruno's crew if he promises to set him free. Meanwhile, somewhere in another jewelry store, Bruno plans to buy a wristwatch that costs about $60,000. Annie, thinking this is going to be another robbery, is surprised when Bruno brings out the $60,000 in cash and pays for the item. As they spend good time together, unaware that the police, with the intel from the criminal earlier, begin to arrest Bruno's crew one by one until finally, they get to Bruno. At the police station, George questions Bruno about the other captured guys, and he denies knowing them. When he's asked about his girlfriend, he lies to the officer, telling him that she's just a street worker who he spent the night with and nothing more. George can tell he's lying and threatens that Annie would spend 5 years in jail as an accomplice. Hearing this, Bruno promises to confess all his crimes if he releases Annie. The chief of police gives him his word and asks another officer to take Annie away. Bruno asks if he could keep his wristwatch because it belongs to his father, and he's scared that the prison guard might take it and never return it. George agrees, and Bruno tells him all he needs to know. Outside, Bruno hugs Annie for the very last time before he's taken to prison, where he will await his trial. There, he meets a middle-aged man known as Jean-Luc. He says he's there for armed robbery, and he was sentenced to 12 years. Hearing this, Bruno tells him he's awaiting trial but won't be waiting for it. In the following days, Bruno meets with one of the prison guards and gives him his wristwatch as a bribe. With that, he can send out written messages to his girlfriend, Annie, and also have access to the mechanic room, where he takes some tools he needs for his escape. Inside the cell, Jean watches for any guard, and when the last one makes the final routine check, Bruno successfully pulls out the iron rod on the window and escapes. Outside, he throws a rope to the other side. After a few trials, the rope successfully hooks, and Bruno climbs up first. He makes it to the top, where Steve is waiting in a car for him. He tells Jean to do the same, however, Jean is too old and can't climb up enough. He can't make it, so he tells Bruno to leave without him. Bruno doesn't want to leave but has no choice and promises to come back for him. The following morning, George receives a call about the prison break. Meanwhile, Bruno and Steve go on a rampage, robbing all the jewelry stores in town. On the newspaper, people are now seeing him as a star. George thinks he's doing this for fun because, among his heists, no single death has been recorded. George is having breakfast in a restaurant when Bruno and Steve pay him a visit. Bruno tells him to focus on other bad guys because he's like a breeze and can't be caught, before leaving in a car to the state prison. Steve pretends to come visit an inmate when he pulls out his gun at the prison security and orders them to comply and open the gates for them. Bruno walks straight to Jean's cell and rescues him. The trio walks out of the prison while the guards argue among themselves about what just happened. Inside the car, Bruno offers Jean a new passport and some cash, telling him to find his way to Brazil, and that in the future, he'll meet him there. Afterward, Bruno arrives at a hotel. After spending some time together with his girlfriend Annie, Bruno makes a call to a gold buyer who informs him to come later in the day for the transaction, unaware that the police have been tipped about the deal. He gets to the location, and once the exchange is done, all of a sudden and out of nowhere, some men surrounds him, and he's easily arrested. During his trial, Bruno is sentenced to 5 years in prison alongside his colleagues, including Annie, who receives just 18 months of probation for being an accomplice. During the train ride to prison, Bruno and George play cards together, where he tells George that he's not a criminal. He only steals from the rich because that's what the rich do to the poor, and yet they are not in prison while he gets to do it as a free man. George is confused and reminds him that they are heading to prison, although he adores his enthusiasm. At that moment, Steve, who has been on the train all this while, sneaks his way into their compartment and orders the officers on guard not to make any move or he'll shoot them. Bruno smiles at George before leaving with his cousin. Patrick asks Drago to join them, but he refuses, saying he'd rather serve his time as he's too old to be running and hiding from the cops. Bruno goes straight to his girlfriend who's very excited to see him. He invites her to go on a vacation with him. While enjoying the moment, Bruno pretends to go get ice cream and ends up stealing some Cartier jewelry. Annie learns about this and starts to pack up. Bruno tries to stop her, but she complains that she's tired of him stealing all the time. She really wants to settle down with him and have a proper family, but she won't get to experience it if he ends up in prison. Bruno expresses that he is also considering stopping, but after one last heist. This frustrates Annie even more, and she leaves. The next day, Bruno and his friend pretend to be rich customers and easily make it to a Cartier store, where they make away with millions worth of jewelry. The robbery is reported on the news all over France, and Bruno doesn't hesitate to flaunt the steals. Everyone in the city now knows who he is, and he doesn't feel safe anymore. With the help of his friend, he's able to get a new passport so he can travel to Brazil and lay low. He invites his partner to join him afterward, which he agrees to. Bruno easily changes his looks, looking forward to spending his fortune going to the beach and living life to the fullest alongside his girlfriend, Annie. He finally makes it to the border, but he's flagged down by one of the customs officers for a routine check. After checking his paperwork, something doesn't seem right, so the officer takes him to his superior. There, the officer doesn't believe his documents are real, so he proposes to phone the embassy to confirm his identity. Of course, Bruno gets nervous and doesn't want the customs superior to involve the embassy, so he starts yelling at them for delaying him, cooking up some stories to convince them to let him go. At that moment, the chief of police shows up and arrests him. He's taken into custody, and his trial starts immediately, with the judge sentencing him to 20 years in prison. This comes as a shock to Annie, who begged her lover to end this a long time ago. She couldn't bear the pain. Bruno also looks at her with a disappointed expression. His partner, which is the only leverage he has to escape the prison, ends up being cornered and shot to death by a stranger. The chief of police pays him a visit in the prison to announce his retirement, saying that so far, Bruno has been his greatest work, and he's happy to retire with the trophy of having captured him. Bruno congratulates him, assuring him that he would pay him a visit, and maybe they could hang out. Bruno begins to work with the prison guards as he plans to escape his cell for the second time. He's given a walkie-talkie with instructions to wait for a call and further instructions, and if anything goes wrong, he should return to his cell. That night, Bruno makes his way around the prison easily, but comes across a door that happens to be locked. He's asked to return to his cell since everything isn't going as planned, as 2 prison guards are already coming. Bruno proves to be stubborn and determined to escape the prison that night. He hides in a cabinet, but things quickly turn ugly when his walkie-talkie begins to make some screeching noise, and he's easily found and beaten for leaving his cell room. Determined not to spend his next day in confinement, Bruno makes a jump that ultimately ends his life. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe.